The pot roast was still steaming when Diane set down her fork, folded her hands like she was about to say grace, and told me to give my bedroom to her son, or get out of the house I grew up in. I remember the exact sound the kitchen clock made in the silence after. Tick, tick. My father, David, kept his eyes on his plate. My stepbrother Tyler smirked into his phone. And I sat there, 23 years old, in the dining room where my mother used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings, being told I had until the end of the month to disappear. What Diane did not know, what none of them knew, was that the house she was so eager to hand to her son did not belong to her. It did not even belong to my father. It belonged to me. And it had belonged to me since I was 10 years old. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand how a plate of pot roast became the night my whole world cracked open, you have to understand what that house meant, what I gave up for it, and how long I stayed quiet while a stranger rearranged my life around me. My name is Emily Carter. I was born and raised in Westerville, Ohio, a quiet suburb just north of Columbus, in a 2-story house on Maplewood Lane with a crab apple tree in the front yard and a swing my grandfather built bolted to the biggest branch. That house was not just a house. My mother, Sarah, grew up in it. Her parents built it. When they passed, the house came to her. And she raised me inside those same walls. And every scuff on the door frame was a growth mark with my name and a date penciled beside it. My mother got sick when I was 9. Ovarian cancer. It moved fast, and it moved quiet, the way the worst things do. And by the time I was 10, she was gone. I do not remember a lot of that year clearly. I remember the smell of the hospital. I remember my father crying in the garage where he thought I could not hear him. And I remember my Aunt Ruth, my mother's older sister, flying in from Phoenix and holding me on the porch swing while the whole neighborhood came by with casseroles nobody ate. What I did not know at 10, what I would not fully understand until I was 23, was that my mother had done something before she died. Something careful. Something that would matter more than I could have imagined. For 4 years after Mom died, it was just me and my dad. He was an electrician, good with his hands, quiet with his feelings. He worked long hours and I learned to make dinner, do laundry, and keep myself company. We were not rich, but we were steady. We had each other, and we had the house, and for a while that felt like enough to survive on. Then, when I was 14, my father met Diane. She was a real estate agent. That detail is going to matter, so tuck it away somewhere. She had a bright smile, a firm handshake, and a laugh that filled up a room whether you wanted it to or not. She came with a son named Tyler, a year younger than me. And for the first few months she was warm. She brought over dinners. She complimented my drawings. She told my father she just wanted to help ease the load off his shoulders. And my father, lonely and exhausted, believed her. They married a little over a year later, in our backyard under the crab apple tree. I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. But I remember standing at that wedding in a dress Diane picked out, watching her move through the yard like she already owned the place, touching the porch railing, straightening a chair, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach that I did not have a word for yet. I do not think I imagined it. I think even then some part of me knew. Diane and Tyler moved into our house, and slowly, the house stopped feeling like mine. It started small. My mother's paintings came down off the walls, wrapped in old sheets, and carried up to the attic. Diane said the colors were dated. The quilt my grandmother made vanished into a closet. Diane repainted the living room a flat gray she called sophisticated. Every trace of the woman who built her life inside those walls got softly, politely erased. One weekend project at a time. And every time I said anything, Diane would tilt her head, put a hand to her chest, and say, "Emily, honey, this is everyone's home now. We all have to make room for each other. Make room." She used that phrase for years. I did not understand back then how literal she meant it. Here is the part one want you to really hear, because it matters for everything that comes after. I did not fight her. I made myself small. I told myself I was being dramatic, That a grieving girl was bound to resent whoever tried to fill her mother's shoes. That the fair and mature thing to do was to be grateful and quiet and easy. So, I became the easy one. The reliable one. The one who never asked for anything. And I gave. God, I gave. When Tyler needed a laptop for school, the money came out of the budget. And my request for new soccer cleats got postponed until next season. Then the season after that, until I just stopped playing. When Diane wanted to redo the kitchen, my college fund, the small one my mother had started, got quietly borrowed against. And my father promised he would pay it back, and he never quite did. I watched Tyler get a car at 16. I took the bus. I watched Diane throw Tyler a graduation party with a rented tent and a caterer. My own graduation, we went to Applebee's and Diane spent most of dinner on her phone. I told myself it was fine. I told myself so many times that it became a kind of prayer. Then, 2 years ago, everything got harder. My father had a heart attack. He was 52. He collapsed on a job site, and for about 10 minutes, while the paramedics worked on him in the back of that ambulance, I genuinely thought I was going to lose the only parent I had left. He survived, but he was out of work for months, and the medical bills came in like a tide that would not stop. I was 21 then, in my second year of nursing school at Columbus State, and I made a choice that I do not regret, but that cost me more than anyone in that house ever acknowledged. I dropped to part-time. I picked up shifts as a caregiver at an assisted living facility, and I waited tables at a diner off State Street on the weekends. I handed over almost every dollar I made to keep the lights on and the mortgage current and my father's prescriptions filled. And here is the thing about Diane, the real estate agent, the woman who was so worried about everyone making room. When the money got tight, she did not sell her leased luxury SUV. She did not cut back on her nail appointments or her wine club. She looked at me, the stepdaughter, the easy one, and she let me carry it. I paid to have the water heater replaced when it died that winter. I have the receipt still. $680. I paid a roofer to patch the leak over the back bedroom.
$1,400.
I kept every receipt in a shoebox in my closet, not because I was planning anything, but because some quiet, careful instinct that I inherited from my mother told me to keep a record. Keep the paper. You never know. You never know. My father recovered, slowly. He went back to work part-time, but he was different after the heart attack.
Softer.
More tired. More afraid. And Diane, I noticed, got louder in that same period. More sure of herself. She started talking about the future in a way that did not include me. She would say things at dinner like, once we get the house situation sorted out.
Or,
when we consolidate, we will finally have some breathing room. And my father would nod along, gray and quiet, and I would sit there thinking, what house situation? What is there to consolidate?
I want to walk you through the warning signs now.
Because looking back, they were everywhere, and I ignored every single one. The first sign was the mail. I noticed, over the course of a few months, that mail started going missing. Nothing dramatic. But I was expecting a letter from my Aunt Ruth in Arizona, who I texted with sometimes and who sent me a card every birthday. And it never came. When I called her, she swore she had mailed it. Then a letter I was expecting from the school about my financial aid never arrived. And when I asked Diane, she said, "Oh, I put all the mail on the front table. You must have missed it." But I checked that table every day. I did not miss it. The second sign was the locks. One afternoon, I came home from a diner shift, and my key would not turn. Diane had changed the locks. When I asked her about it, she smiled and said there had been a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, and she was just being safe. And she gave me a new key, and I felt foolish for being upset. But I noticed she never gave me a key to the new deadbolt she had put on the door of what used to be the guest room, the room she had started calling her office. The room where she kept a small gray fireproof lockbox that I had glimpsed exactly once. The third sign was the way she talked about my bedroom. I still had my childhood room. It was the biggest of the 3 bedrooms upstairs, with 2 windows that looked out over the crabapple tree, and a window seat my grandfather built. It was the last place in that house that still felt like mine. My mother's handwriting was still on the closet door frame, marking my height at 7. At 8, at 9. I would not let Diane paint over it. It was the one line I held. And Diane wanted that room.
Badly.
She started saying that Tyler needed a space to grow. Tyler, who was 20 now and had never held a job for more than a few weeks, had decided he was going to be a streamer, one of those guys who films himself playing video games.
He needed a studio, Diane said.
Good lighting. Room for his setup. She would stand in the doorway of my bedroom, arms crossed, looking at it like a buyer walking through an open house, which I would later understand is exactly what she was doing. You have too much space for one person, she told me once. It is not really fair to Tyler. I said nothing.
Of course I said nothing.
I had spent 9 years saying nothing, but something was building. I could feel it. And then came the dinner. It was a Thursday in late September. I had worked a double. A caregiving shift in the morning and the diner in the evening. And I came home dead on my feet to the smell of pot roast, which Diane only made when she wanted something. Tyler was at the table. My father was at the table, looking older than his 54 years. Diane had set out the good plates. I should have known. We ate mostly in silence. Small talk about the weather, about Tyler's channel, which had 40 subscribers, most of them Diane's coworkers. And then Diane set down her fork, folded her hands, and looked at me with that bright, terrible smile. Emily, she said, we have all been talking, and we think it is time you gave your brother your room. I remember blinking. He is not my brother, I said, which was the wrong thing to fixate on, but it was the first thing out of my mouth. Diane's smile got thinner. Tyler needs the space, she said. You are barely home. You are always working. It does not make sense for you to have the biggest room in the house. I looked at my father.
Dad, I said.
He did not look up. It is a lot of house, Emily, Diane went on, her voice getting that hard, bright edge. And frankly, at your age, most young women have moved out already. We have been very generous letting you stay. So here is what is going to happen. You're going to move your things into the small room or into the basement and give Tyler the master. And if that is not something you can be gracious about, then maybe it is time you thought about finding your own place. Pack your bags and go. Those choices are yours. The kitchen clock went tick,
tick.
And I want to tell you that I stood up and delivered some perfect speech. I did not. I felt my face go hot and my eyes sting, and I looked at my father one more time. My father, who I had bled myself dry to keep alive, and he still would not meet my eyes. Tyler was smirking into his phone, and Diane sat back in her chair, satisfied, like she had just closed a difficult sale. I said, I need to think. And I went upstairs, and I shut my door, and I sat on the window seat my grandfather built, and I did not cry. That is the strange thing. I had thought I would cry. Instead, something in me went very still and very clear, because sitting there in the dark, I remembered something. I remembered that when my mother died, my Aunt Ruth had said a strange thing to me at the funeral. She had crouched down and taken my 10-year-old face in her hands and said, "This is your house, Emmy. No matter what happens, no matter who comes and goes, this house is yours. Your mama made sure of it. And when you are older, you come to me and I will explain everything." I had been 10. I had forgotten it. 9 years of grief and casseroles and staying quiet had buried it. But sitting in that window seat, being told to pack my bags, it came back to me whole. Your mama made sure of it. Made sure of what? That night, I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, and I let myself, for the first time in years, actually look at everything. The missing mail, the change locks, the lockbox in the office, the way Diane talked about consolidating and sorting out the house situation, the way a real estate agent had married a widower and slowly, methodically, erased his first wife from the walls and was now trying to erase his daughter from the deed. The deed. I did not even know whose name was on the deed. In 9 years, I had never once thought to ask. The next morning, I did 2 things. First, I called my Aunt Ruth in Phoenix. And second, I started keeping my shoebox of receipts. my nursing school papers, and my birth certificate in my locker at work, because for the first time in my life, I did not feel safe leaving anything important in that house. Aunt Ruth answered on the second ring. When I told her what had happened at dinner, there was a long silence. And then she said, in a voice I had never heard her use, that low, steady voice people get when they are furious and trying not to scare you. Emily, I need you to sit down. There are some things your father should have told you years ago. Some things I assumed he had. And then she told me, when my mother, Sarah, was dying, she knew she was dying, and she was not naive about people. She had watched her own mother get taken advantage of by a second husband years before, and she was determined that whatever happened to her family, her daughter would always have the one thing no one could take: a home. So my mother quietly, with a lawyer named Patricia Nguyen in Columbus, put the house on Maplewood Lane into a trust. Not a will, a trust. She named her sister Ruth as the trustee, the person legally in charge of protecting it. And she named me, Emily, as the sole beneficiary. The house was to be held in trust for me, and it would become fully, legally mine on my 25th birthday. My father was allowed to live there. That was written in. He had every right to stay in the home as long as he wanted. But he did not own it. He never had.
He could not sell it.
He could not borrow against it. He could not give a single room of it to anyone, because it was not his to give. The house was mine. It had been mine since I was 10 years old, and I was, at that moment, 23, which meant I was less than 2 years away from it becoming fully and irreversibly mine. I sat down on the floor of my kitchen, and I could not speak for a full minute. Ruth kept talking. She said she had assumed my father explained it to me when I turned 18. She said she had sent letters over the years, to me directly, checking in, and had thought it strange that I never wrote back about the trust. She had even sent a copy of the trust documents to the house 2 years ago, after my father's heart attack, because she got worried about how the bills were being handled. The mail. The missing mail. It all clicked into place with a sound like a lock turning. Diane had been intercepting it for years. She had known, or suspected, exactly what that house was. Of course she had. She was a real estate agent. She could read a property record. She could look up a deed. She had married my father, moved into a house he did not own, and spent 9 years slowly, patiently working out how to get her hands on an asset that was legally promised to his daughter. And the clock was running out. I was going to turn 25. The trust was going to vest. Once it did, the house would be mine free and clear, and there would be nothing anyone could do. So she had to move fast. She had to get me out of the house, out of the room, out of the picture, before that birthday came. And she had to do something about the fact that my father could not legally sell it. Ruth said the words that turned my stomach to ice. Emily, I need you to find out if your father has signed anything. If she is trying to move that fast, she may be trying to get him to sign a quitclaim, to transfer his interest, even though he does not really have one to transfer. She may be trying to muddy the water. Or she may be trying to get you to leave voluntarily so she can claim you abandoned it. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. And Emily, whatever you do, find those documents. I hung up the phone, and I stood in that kitchen. And I felt the last 9 years rearrange themselves in my head into a completely different shape. Every dinner, every borrowed dollar, this is everyone's home now. It had never been about family. It had been about a building. And I had been paying to keep the roof on a house that a stranger was trying to steal from me.
Now,
I want to be very clear about something, because this is where a lot of people would have done something stupid. And I understand the urge, believe me. But I was in nursing school. I was going to be a nurse. My whole life was about staying calm when everything is on fire, about doing the careful, correct thing when your hands want to shake.
I did not scream at Diane.
I did not smash her wine glasses. I did not post anything online. I did the boring, powerful thing. I got proof. I called Patricia Nguyen, the attorney whose name Ruth gave me. It turned out she was still practicing, still in Columbus, and when I explained who my mother was, there was a warm, sad pause and she said, Sarah's daughter. I have wondered about you for years." She confirmed everything Ruth had told me and offered to send me certified copies of the trust. I gave her my work address, not the house. I was learning. Then I waited for my chance. It came the following Tuesday. Diane had a house showing across town. Tyler was out. My father was at a doctor's appointment I had, ironically, driven him to, and then made an excuse to leave early from. I had the house to myself for maybe an hour. I went into Diane's office. The gray lockbox was on the shelf in the closet, and it was, of course, locked. But I knew Diane. And I knew she was lazy about the things she felt safe about. And I checked the top drawer of her desk, and there, in a little dish next to a tube of hand cream, was a small key. My hands were steady. I want you to know that. My hands were completely steady. Inside that lockbox, I found a stack of mail addressed to me that I had never seen. Birthday cards from Ruth going back 3 years, one with a $50 bill still inside. A letter from Patricia and Gwen from 2 years ago, opened, with a copy of the trust that I had never been allowed to read. And underneath all of it, in a manila folder, I found the thing that changed everything. It was a quitclaim deed, the kind of document you use to transfer property. It named my father, David Carter, as transferring his interest in the house at Maplewood Lane to David Carter and Diane Carter jointly, with rights of survivorship, which is a fancy way of saying if it had gone through, and if my father had died, Diane would own the whole house outright. It was dated 3 weeks earlier, and it was signed. My father had signed it. There was also a printout. And this is the detail that made me sit down hard on Diane's office floor. It was a listing agreement, a draft, for the house on Maplewood Lane, with Diane listed as the selling agent. She had already been preparing to put my mother's house, my house, on the market. She had even penciled in a target price and a note to herself. Note, it read, in Diane's handwriting, confirm E out before spring. Handle Ruth. Confirm E out before spring. E was me. Handle Ruth. Ruth was the trustee, the one person with legal power to stop her. She had a plan, and it was written in her own hand, and I was holding it. Now here is the thing that saved me. The thing my mother did 13 years before I would need it. That quitclaim deed my father signed? It was worthless. It was legally meaningless. My father could not transfer his interest in the house, because he did not have an ownership interest to transfer. The house was in trust. Ruth was the trustee. The only people who could do anything with that property were Ruth, acting on my behalf, and eventually me. Diane, a licensed real estate agent, either did not fully understand that or, more likely, was gambling that no one would ever look closely enough to notice. That she could paper over the trust with enough documents and enough pressure and enough of me being gone, that by the time anyone noticed, it would be too late. My mother, dying at 41, had built a wall around me that a professional could not get through. I sat on that floor, and I cried finally, but not for the reason you would think. I cried because for the first time in 13 years, I felt my mother's arms around me. She had known. Somehow, in her last months, she had known exactly what kind of person might one day sit across a dinner table from her daughter, and she had made sure that no matter what, I would have a home. I photographed every single page. The hidden mail, the trust, the quitclaim, the listing agreement. Confirm E out before spring. Handle Ruth. I put everything back exactly as I found it, locked the box, returned the key to the little dish, and walked out of that office with 200 photographs on my phone and a calm I had never felt before in my life. That night at dinner, Diane asked me sweetly if I had thought any more about the room, and I looked at her, this woman who had spent 9 years erasing my mother and grooming me to give up the last thing I owned, and I said, I have. I need a little more time. Can I let you know by the end of next week? She smiled and said, of course, honey, take your time. And Tyler said, do not take too long, and my father stared at his plate. And I ate my dinner, and I thought, you have no idea what is coming. Not because I was planning revenge. I was not. I was planning something much simpler and much more devastating. I was planning the truth. Over the next week, I did the careful thing. I met with Patricia and Gwen in person and showed her the photographs. She went quiet. And then she said, in a lawyer's flat, dangerous voice, "This is a serious matter. The mail interception alone is a federal issue. The forgery is a state matter. And the attempt to list a property she has no authority over could cost her her real estate license. I want you to understand your position, Emily. You are not the one in trouble here. You are holding all of it." I called Aunt Ruth. And Ruth, God bless her, got on a plane. She flew from Phoenix to Columbus and she checked into a hotel, and she said, "I promised your mother I would protect you. And I have been too far away for too long, and that ends now." And then we did the hardest thing of all. We told my father. I did not want to hurt him. Understand that. Whatever he was guilty of. And he was guilty of weakness, of looking away, of letting a frightened, tired man be led by a stronger will. He was still my father. And I had watched him nearly die 2 years before, and I loved him. So I did not ambush him. Ruth and I asked him to meet us alone, at a coffee shop near his work, on a Wednesday morning when Diane thought he was on a job. He came in confused, and when he saw Ruth his face changed. He had not seen her in years. He sat down, and I put the trust documents on the table in front of him, and I asked him one question. "Dad, do you know who owns the house?" And my father, my quiet, tired, broken father, looked at those documents, and then he looked at me, and his eyes filled up, and he said, "Of course I know, Emmy. It is yours. It was always yours. Your mother made me promise." The whole table went silent. "You knew," I said. "You knew the whole time." And then the story came out, and it was worse and sadder than I had imagined. He said Diane had found out about the trust years ago, back when they first married, when she pulled the property records the way agents do. He said she had been furious, had felt tricked, had said Sarah had reached out from the grave to insult her. He said she had spent years telling him the trust was unfair, that a dead woman should not control a living family, that he was the man of the house, and it was humiliating that he did not own his own home. He said the pressure never stopped. And after his heart attack, when he was weak and scared and grateful just to be alive, she had put a document in front of him and told him it was just to protect the family, just in case. And he had signed it without reading it because he could not fight anymore. He said he did not even really understand what he had signed until he saw the look on my face. He said, "I have been a coward, Emmy. I let her do it because it was easier than a war. And I told myself you would be fine because the trust would protect you. So what did it matter if I kept the peace? I told myself your mother built you a wall. So I did not have to be one. And I am so ashamed. I want to tell you, I forgave him instantly. I did not. Something can be understandable and still be a betrayal. A father is supposed to be the wall. He is not supposed to hand his daughter a fortress and then help lay siege to it because the fighting made him tired. I told him that. I told him I could not just wave it away. But I also told him he had a choice right now about who he was going to be for the rest of it. He could keep his eyes on his plate, or he could stand up. He stood up. Here is how it ended, and I promise you it is not a movie. It is realistic, and in some ways that makes it heavier. With Ruth as trustee and Patricia and Gwen as our attorney, we did everything by the book. The forged quitclaim was formally voided, which was easy, because it was meaningless to begin with. Patricia sent Diane a certified letter, on law firm letterhead, laying out exactly what we knew. The trust, the intercepted mail, which we had photographs of, in her own lockbox, in her own office. The listing agreement she had drafted for a property she had no authority to sell. Confirm out before spring. Handle Ruth. Her own handwriting. I was not there when my father showed her the letter, but I heard about it. There was no big screaming scene. There was something quieter and colder. He told me later that she went pale. And then she went to her office and found her lockbox opened, and she understood that the careful, quiet stepdaughter she had underestimated for 9 years had been quieter and more careful than she ever imagined. Diane hired a lawyer of her own, and for about a week there were phone calls between attorneys. But she did not have a case. You cannot fight a trust that a dying woman built like a bank vault 13 years before you ever showed up. And she could not afford the fight anyway, because during all of this, another truth surfaced. Ruth, being thorough, had looked into Diane's finances the way Diane had once looked into my mother's. And it turned out Diane was drowning. 2 maxed-out credit cards. A car she was 3 payments behind on. And years back, before my father, a short sale on a house she had lost. The whole marriage, in a certain light, looked less like love and more like a rescue plan with my house as the life raft. My father filed for divorce. Diane and Tyler moved out that November, into an apartment across town. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no perfect comeuppance speech. Just boxes and a moving van. And a woman who had spent 9 years planning to sell my childhood, carrying her own things out of it in cardboard. Patricia reported the mail interception and the deed forgery to the appropriate authorities. And Diane surrendered her real estate license rather than face a formal investigation. That was the closest thing to justice that any of it came to. She did not go to prison. Most people like her do not. They just get quietly smaller and lose the thing they were reaching for and move on to somewhere else. Tyler, I will say one thing about. About a year later, out of nowhere, I got a text from him. It said, I did not know the whole thing about the house and the trust. My mom told me it was fair. I am sorry I was a jerk to you. I do not know if that was real growth or guilt or his mother's version filtered through a 19-year-old who never got a chance to become his own person before this. I texted back, thank you for saying that, and I meant it. And I also never texted him again. And I made peace with both of those things being true at once. And my father and we are rebuilding. Slowly. It is not the same as it was before Diane, and it will never be. There is a scar there now, and I do not pretend there is not. But when the house fully became mine on my 25th birthday, when the trust vested and the deed had only my name on it, my mother's name and then my own, I made a choice that surprised even me. I let my father stay. I did not have to. Legally, it was mine, all mine, to do with as I pleased. But I sat on the porch swing my grandfather built, under the crab apple tree, in the house my mother fought from her deathbed to keep for me. And I thought about what she would have wanted. And I did not think she raised me to throw a tired old man out into the cold, even a man who had failed me. So I told my father he could stay, as long as he wanted, in the small room now, not the master. And I told him the rules. No more looking away. No more choosing peace over the people you love. And if I ever caught a whiff of him letting someone rearrange my life around me again, he would be out, and I would mean it. He cried and he agreed. And he has kept his word. He drives me to my nursing shift sometimes now. He fixed the porch light last month without being asked. It is small, but it is real. I finished nursing school. I am an RN now, working in a cardiac unit, which, if you know my father's history, you will understand is not an accident. And I live in the house on Maplewood Lane, where my mother's handwriting still marks my height on the closet door frame, 7, 8, 9, because I never let anyone paint over it, and now no one ever will. So here is what I learned, and I offer it to you for whatever it is worth. Love is not supposed to be leverage. The moment someone offers you a home, or a family, or a seat at the table, and then holds it over your head as something they can take away if you do not obey, that was never love. That was a transaction dressed up as belonging. My stepmother told me for 9 years that we all had to make room for each other, and what she meant, the whole time, was that I had to make room for her to take everything I had. And the second thing, stay quiet if you must, to keep yourself safe. But never stop keeping the paper. Never stop paying attention. I almost lost everything because I trained myself to look away, to be easy, to not make trouble. The only reason I did not lose it is that a dying woman 13 years ahead of me, and some small careful instinct she left in my blood, told me to keep the receipts and remember what I was owed. Your kindness is not a weakness, but your silence can become a weapon in the wrong hands. Know the difference. Know your worth, and know what your name is on and what it is not. The house is quiet tonight. The crab apple tree is dropping its leaves. And for the first time in a very long time, I am home, and no one can tell me to pack my bags. Let me ask you something before you go. If you had been sitting at that dinner table, being told to give up the last thing you owned, would you have stayed quiet the way I did for all those years? Or would you have spoken up sooner? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know.